Welcome back to the Workgrid. I'm your host, Rob Ryan. In today's episode, we dive deep into the world of digital workplaces with none other than Dante Ragazzo. Dante is a seasoned expert with over 25 years' experience deploying and managing digital workplace solutions for global brands. He spent the last decade leading digital workplace initiatives at Tapestry, the parent company of the names such as Coach, Kate Spade, and Stuart Weitzman. Whether at home or in the office, Dante is perpetually engaged at fixing, teaching, and learning something new. Today, Dante and I will explore that crucial relationship between IT and business units and the indispensable need for robust digital workplace strategy, as well how emerging technologies like AI are reshaping our work environments. We also tackle the issue of digital friction and discuss practical ways to enhance productivity and collaboration across platforms. So grab your notebook and let's get ready to unlock some invaluable insights with Dante Ragazzo right here on the Work Grid. Hey, Dante, welcome to the show. Before we jump in and get started, I think it'd be great for our listeners to learn a little bit about yourself and kind of some of the work you've been doing over the last few years.
Morning, Rob. Morning, Frank. Great to be here. Thanks so much. I really do appreciate it. So my name is Dante Ragazzo. I am, let's see, I'm a husband. I'm a father of three. I have three kids, two girls and a boy. Um, my wife and I have been married going on 26 years, and we are very much looking forward to becoming empty nesters. We're not there yet. We got a few years to go, but a man can dream. And so that's really who I am day to day. Professionally, I am the senior director of digital workplace at Tapestry. Um, and some of your listeners may not know who Tapestry is, but they've probably heard of our brand. So we're the parent company of Coach, Kate Spade, and Stuart Weitzman brands. So luxury retail is the market that we're in. Love those brands. Very proud working there, and I've been there over 12 years, actually.
Awesome. Excellent. Yeah. Could you share a little bit about your journey into the digital workplace realm? Kind of what inspired you to really focus in on that junction of technology, strategy, communications, et cetera?
Sure. So my education is in communications. I am a proud Scarlet Knight. I went to Rutgers for undergraduate and graduate, and I went to their school of communication. So I have a master's in communication and information studies. Um, and we studied at that time, actually, the library school was part of it was actually the School of Communication, Information, and Library Studies at that time. And so we studied systems before there were, you know, things like Netflix. Like before Netflix existed, we were toying with concepts like tagging and like how do you categorize things.
Oh, very cool.
Came out and began a career in what I would call traditional communications, so I was writing messages um and after a couple of years, that wasn't really what I loved doing, but it seemed to me like it was maybe the path that I had going forward. And then I was sitting in a meeting one day and our VP, head of communications, said, I've heard about this thing called blogging. And I'm just curious if any of you have heard of that. And I was like, I raised my hand. I was like, I've heard of it. I don't know much about it, but I'll look into it. And that was kind of the beginning. I started looking into what blogs were, reporting up to her what they were. And then very shortly after that, the company I was with at the time said they were deploying a new intranet system that they were calling an enterprise portal. And they were toying with this concept of employee self-service where we were going to manage our own content. And we were like, whoa, what? And so I was sort of the natural fit as the person who should learn about that, understand how it worked. Excuse me. And that's really what happened. I began just digging into it. And what I'll say is, I think very quickly it spoke to me. Very quickly, I thought, gosh, I am engaged in this. I think about this stuff all the time. I'm going home and I'm talking to my wife about this or that. Like it was
Hmm.
clearly speaking to me in some way. And I've more or less kept my career connected to the technology side of the communications team ever since. Um, and for me, I'm what I say, a natural tinkerer. So here at home and at work, I see things, whether it's a physical thing or it's a toy. I want to understand, how does it work? Why does it work? And That's just sort of a natural fire that I have inside of myself. And so it just seems to work well with working with communication professionals whose needs I understand. And at the same time, almost seeing just this natural gap between them and the technology that they need to do their jobs. And my experience very early was the communicators I'm working with really struggle to understand how I'm trying to show them how to do these things. And so it became clear to me that as technology becomes more ubiquitous, there's a real opportunity here to be the person on the team who understands communication and how communicators think, but also understands the technology and can bridge that gap. And early on in my career, it was very often just being in conversations.
Hmm.
And even today, actually, sometimes I'm just in conversations and they're literally like, Dante, I just like you to hear because IT is going to tell me things and I may not know what they're talking about or other things that it relates to. And, I'm able to play that sort of translator role very often. And
Do
so
you find
that,
yourself flipping sides and being, comms ambassador over to IT?
yes, yes,
Yeah.
100%. Um, yes, I do. In fact, I've often compared this to, and I don't know if this is politically incorrect or not, but I think about, stories of when, as the frontier of the United States was opening, and you had people venturing out into the space that was inhabited by Native Americans, and stories of people being ingratiated into Native American tribes.
Hmm.
And then in some cases becoming diplomats between the two, you know. And I sort of see myself as playing that role. It's like I'm often mistaken for IT.
I,
People often think
I'll,
talking to me that I'm IT.
I'll be completely honest with you, Dante. The first time I saw you present, I thought you were IT.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Uh,
What do you think the state of the relationship between IT and comms is in 2024? I'm asking to put your
I,
diplomat hat on right now.
yeah, I mean, I think, look, I'm seeing a greater um, proficiency. I'm seeing enhanced proficiency of tools and technology, particularly from new employees as they come on board and they've been maybe they're, dare I
It,
say, of a younger generation,
Sure.
digital
so
natives,
Yeah.
exactly. So
those damn
technology is
kids.
part of their lives. Yeah, well, it's just what it is, right? Um, and so the benefit of it is that they're not afraid of it. And so they jump right in and they want to understand how it works. Um, I think we struggle because now we're sort of getting into everything, but my experience is that, again, in my experience, IT tends to be methodical. They want to lay out a plan and they want right up front, what is this tool going to look like? What is it going to do for me?
Sure.
So give me all the requirements. And the business teams just do not understand how to give requirements. They really don't. You need somebody on the technology side who can just have a conversation, walk me through your day, show me what you do. Oh, why are you doing it this way? Like, why are you in what systems do you use? And you need someone who can understand why the business operates a certain way and not try to tell them to change how they operate, which is very traditional IT.
Hmm.
But at the same time, on the business side, you need somebody who, can keep things in a way that the person on the technology side can sort of just keep it all together. And I mean, I'm sure you guys have been in requirement conversations, and the business person is just like all over the place.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, okay, but we're not going to solve every problem for you with this solution. We can solve these problems. Well, but it would also, if it could do this, and you're like, okay, we're not getting anywhere because we just keep like there's a point for envisioning, but then at a
Yeah,
certain
this
point you got to say,
is
okay,
scope creep.
right,
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that communications people today respect IT and they appreciate the value that IT brings to them. I think beyond comms, I just think the businesses in general, people on the business side generally don't know how to talk to IT. Um, and you could flip that too, and you could say IT just they don't understand how to hear the business. It's literally like people who speak different languages.
Hmm.
I mean, I'll give you an example. If you ask someone, and by the way, IT also, it sounds like I'm beating up IT, but the fact is, I love IT, and it's just like I feel almost like I feel the need to protect them from themselves sometimes because they're well-meaning, they're problem solvers. So when you call them, if you're an executive and you call and you get somebody at the service desk and you have a problem, well, whoever that gets to, if it's somebody within the IT space, they're going to desperately try and solve that problem for you right now. They're not necessarily thinking about what are the longer term implications of this solution for you. Am I giving you a link to something that's going to be only good for like 2 days? Am I giving you a link to something that's only good for the two of us? Am I going to put a link on a thing on the website that's going to be outdated in 2 weeks and I'm never going to come back and check it? Right? You ask somebody in IT, how do you improve search? And they say, oh, well, what's your doc you want people to find? Whatever. It's doc 1, 2, 3. And they'll say, oh, well, why don't you start it with A, and then the name of the document? Because in their minds, by starting with 3 A's, you're going to show up right at the top of the search.
The old yellow page strategy for a towing company. Yeah.
Or voting. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And think about how many times
we might have to explain
that
for the millennials down in the show notes later on. But yeah.
What are the yellow pages? So, again, like IT means well, and they're trying to solve problems. Where they get themselves in trouble is they solve a problem, but in a very short term. And very often they're not thinking about scalability of a solution, the global accessibility of a solution, or whatever the different dimensions may be. And so having somebody on the business side who can say to both, to say to the person on the business side, okay, look, this is a temporary solution, and long term, I'm going to write up for you all the challenges that are involved in what you're trying to do, or why this is not a simple fix. And the business loves to oversimplify everything, right? Because it's like, here I'm beating up on IT, but the truth of the matter is the business is like, IT is the ultimate scapegoat. They're just like the easiest scapegoat. It's a black box. I put stuff in it. I don't know why we got out garbage, and then when you're trying to figure out, well, who do we blame? It's just so easy to say, well, they didn't build it right. This is a partnership,
Blame
So,
IT, blame the technology. It's everyone
yeah.
else's fault. Yeah, you hear that's a common pattern. It's why most intranets get ripped out after about 6 years because we blame the technology and we didn't put enough people, strategy, governance, et cetera, in place.
But all of those things that you're talking about, temporary solutions, sprawl, building something that's single task purposed. Honestly, that leads right into digital friction and the sprawl of what the topic of the moment is. That I think Rob, that's what we originally met Dante under the auspices of, right?
Yeah, it was about a year ago. What do we have? We had back-to-back presentations, I believe, and you got up there, spoke about digital friction. It mirrored basically the preamble of my presentation. We honestly could have collaborated together. It was funny. So to that, rise of AI, app sprawl, et cetera, in the business, like you bring a good argument and conversation to the table, which is, kind of what are you seeing out there inside organizations in your conversations with other digital workplace leaders in app sprawls happening? Businesses are driving for more spot solutions to try to solve for all those needs that you're saying. And IT's on one side of the fence having to manage all that tech, accruing tech debt, et cetera. Like, do you think businesses really appreciate the threat of digital friction? Is it a threat, et cetera?
So I absolutely think it's a threat. And no, I don't think that businesses appreciate it. I think more data is coming out now that's quantifying what the cost is. And I think that's helpful. Just within the last couple of years, Harvard Business Review came out with a study, and they said that most employees, the average corporate employee, spends 8 minutes per day toggling between applications. They
Awful.
lose 8 minutes per day, right? I did the math, and at 40 hours a week, it comes out to about 200 hours a year. That's 5 weeks of time. That's significant.
Just all tabbing back and forth, ping pong, and yeah.
Exactly. And, think about how often you're tabbing and you're like, no, that's not the one I want. And the break in your concentration. I don't want to give a number because I can't recall the exact numbers of the study, but there's another study
It's enormous.
Right. The amount of time it takes you to get back into flow when you've broken your flow. and how
24
easy it
minutes.
is to break your flow. Okay, you guys know.
Yeah,
So,
it's funny. I actually had the author on a few podcasts ago.
hmm,
Actually, it'll probably have dropped by the time this one drops. But Gloria Mark of UC Irvine, her book's Attention Span, fantastic book. But just like years of research and data points on exactly that of your what happens to your cognition and your attention when it's constantly fragmented and disrupted throughout time. And I don't think there's a real appreciation of that because we've kind of been that frog or lobster in the boiling pot over
Mhm.
with all the technology that we have,
yeah.
at our disposal.
But I'm curious, Dante. Let's say you make that case. Um, all true. I think even IT knows it, even the business knows it. Can you make that case internally? Because if inevitably it says, well, we should never context switch, it does eventually lead to this idea that you have a single pane of glass, you don't have more than one tab, and it's a single everything app on your desktop.
Hmm.
One, I want to know if you've tried to push that. And then two, how did you do when you tried
Hmm.
it? Because
Yeah.
I'm that all those things are true, but has the horse left the barn and we are now going to be context switching because stuff isn't going to be in Workday and stuff's going to be in SharePoint and stuff's going to be in ServiceNow and stuff's going to be in Salesforce and stuff's going to be in Confluence and I can
Hmm.
keep naming apps.
Hmm.
Um, is the context switch just the reality we're going to deal with?
To a certain degree, I think it is, at least in the short term. But
Okay.
I mean, maybe I should say the short to medium term. Having said that, today, the way things move so quickly, what feels to me in my old age, as my Generation X body is like, oh, this could take, we're looking at 20 years before we get to that. It could be much shorter than that I mean, things just go shorter. Having said that, um, I think context switching is going to be part of it until we actually get to the point where we're like talking to Jarvis.
Mm.
One of the causes, I think, for context switching, and I have no data to back this up, this is purely anecdotal and based on my experience, okay? But what I've seen is the technology is not the problem. The backup data, like the core data, is the problem. Cleaning and keeping core data accurate is a hard and unglamorous thing. But like the foundation of your home, it bleeds up and it will screw you if you don't take care of it, right? And what I see, and I know in my experience as I'm toggling, is why am I toggling from this to that? Well, I start a thought on a thing, but then I need to insert a link from another site, and I go to that, and now I'm in the process of trying to find that link. And so I'm looking for the link and how hard it is to find that link. And then, or maybe I'm trying to execute a transaction for somebody, one of my employees, and I get to a point where I go to choose the vendor and the vendor isn't in the drop down list. I'm like, okay. So I'm trying to execute a process. I can't because the choice I have to make isn't here. So I do one of two things. Either I pause and I have to go about the process of figuring out how do I add this vendor name to this list, or I pick something wrong just to get through going through the process. I mean, what do you think most managers who are too busy, they just pick something else, right? I mean, that's probably not a great example, but at the same time, I think it's broad enough we can all relate to. Like that's the type of thing that
Mhm.
we've done ourselves, even in filling out a form. We just go,
Yeah,
whatever, I'm
yeah.
going to do this.
I'll get to it. And 8 weeks later, I haven't gotten to it. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And so as a result, later on, somewhere down the line, they're running a report on your vendor, and all of a sudden your employee isn't showing up in that vendor report. And so these things snowball when you have thousands of people all managing core system data. I don't know how you get around that. So I think until we can get to a place where AI is facilitating at the most basic level to where you're filling out that form and it says, what's wrong? And you say, there, my vendor isn't in this. Oh, hang on, I'll do that for you. Or hang on, we need to do this, fill out this form to do that, but I'll remind you in a day to come back and fill this out correctly. Like, okay, maybe then people will start doing things the way that they need to.
So you're saying like offload it to Jarvis, who's standing over your shoulder or floating over your shoulder in the case of Jarvis.
I,
And
I don't I
yeah,
don't see any other way to get out from it. I
yeah.
mean, we use Teams, we have Zoom, we have Microsoft 365, which is a whole bunch of different applications in and of itself. And doing everything through one interface might sound great, but then when you get it, that's got its own frustrations. I mean, Teams is supposed to be that. And personally, I don't like the fact that it's all everything in one place. I'm in the middle of a chat and then a thing comes in and I have to leave the chat to get through. And I know I can pop out the chat, but it's a pain in the ass. Like I want my chat totally separate from Teams at all times, personally. And somebody else might like it all together in one place. My point is simply it's going to be a balancing act because everything through one interface, I don't think in the end is going to I don't think that's what you're driving for.
On a day-to-day basis, when we set aside the 8 minutes a day you're spending context switching, do you think you work all day in Teams, or do you go back and forth between Teams and Chrome, something on
I
your
go,
desktop?
yeah, I go back and forth.
Teams and Chrome and Outlook?
Yeah, and other Microsoft apps. I'm in PowerPoint a
Okay.
lot.
Okay. So you got a
Yeah,
lot of apps. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I don't know yet what the solution is to where, again, when you have so many different people, I'm not sure, other than what we've done, which is create a governance committee to basically be a filter for any new coming apps. I don't know how you keep a handle on it, keep that sprawl from happening. And I think you also need a real strong backbone to push back on people who want to install an app for themselves or for their team, want to start using an app that is very close to something you've already had, but they're losing a little bit of capability, and be able to push back on them and simply say, it's not worth that capability. I'm sorry. And that's a hard thing to do. And whose job is that exactly?
The person to say no, you mean? Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Difficult.
Exactly. It's difficult. And so maybe this sort of brings us full circle a little bit, Rob, to I think this is part of your original question, which is, it's the state of things, and do businesses appreciate the cost of digital friction? And I think the answer right now is the reason I said no is all the things we've talked about.
Yeah.
And I also think that one of the reasons it's hard is because the people who make the decisions are shielded from the pain of everyday life for most employees. And I mean that with peace and love, but I'm talking about executives.
Of course.
If you're an executive, you're very unlikely to be the person executing the transaction in your HR system. You're very unlikely to be the person in your procurement system. It's the people who report to you. And so it's very easy to dismiss the frustration. And it's not that you don't hear it and that you don't want to do something about it. And I'm not even saying that that I don't understand why hard decisions have to be made. I completely get that. But I've never seen action taken on systems as quickly as when you see an executive forced to go through it for themselves. And then all of a sudden it's like, this is unbelievable. How could we be doing this to people? This has been for years. It's like, well, you've never had to go through it. I mean, there's no nice way to say it. And don't get me wrong, we have fantastic executives who are very interested in understanding like what the employees' experiences are and stuff like. It's not but I just think as a general rule, you have a whole group of people who tend to be treated differently, and as a result, they're shielded from challenges like this, and I'm sure a whole bunch of other challenges across the business. So I think that contributes to it. Yeah.
Right? That's human. If you don't actually walk in those shoes, you don't walk that path, you don't feel what it's like, you can appreciate it from afar. There's air quotes there, but you don't really get to see what potential pain people are going through on a day-to-day basis and grind. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why Undercover Boss is so popular.
So what are vendors missing then? Because we touched upon this. Like 365 tries to be the end all be all from your day. You're just going to stuff everything into 365 and you don't need any other tool. And that's not the case. Like it does not fulfill those needs. So what are even spot vendors or, large collaboration vendors for the digital workplace? What are they missing that you think they could do a better job in?
For me, I think the thing that we need more than anything is flexibility, both in what features you can turn on and not turn on,
Mm.
and integratability. Okay. And the latter portion of that, the integratability component to me needs to be much more self-service for the business
Hmm.
and less IT required. The less IT is required, the easier the business, if you have somebody in the right, in that role, the
Yeah.
easier the business can do for themselves, and IT can focus on making sure the lights stay on and all the things that IT is really pressed to focus on a day-to-day basis. Um, I think that self-service capability, the ability to just do things for ourselves would would just go so far. You get feedback from users, you want to make changes. The process of going back when you have to rely on IT to make changes, the process of going back and forth is exhausting. It's exhausting. And then of course it also then includes money, because when you get IT involved, they have to explain their time, which I understand. So the more that vendors could make it so that once you deploy a system, somebody on the business can do anything. And that would include things like, okay, let's add a window that integrates a transaction from Workday or Success Factors or something like that.
Mm.
The more we can get in that direction, the happier I think the business and customers will be. And then I also skipped over very quickly, but flexibility in turning things on and off, right? One of the challenges we have is every new tool that people want to deploy has chat functionality, has a social space, has your own profile. And it's like, you're all trying to outdo one another in the same thing. And it's like, I can't deploy this application because of all the extra garbage it comes with, you know?
How
So
does the extra AI it come with affect both the rollout, your governance, and all that stuff? Because all those tools are probably having AI sprinkled in
AI
right
wash.
now. AI wash. Are you finding that, and how's that? How are you dealing with that? With you run a pretty tight structure.
hmm,
Yeah.
okay, thanks.
Well, I
Um,
mean, relatively speaking, yeah.
yeah. So we are we're in a space right now where everything AI is under review. So
Okay.
we're not deploying anything. We haven't deployed anything AI, including say Copilot. I don't think that's a problem to share that. That's just the reality where we are. So all the applications that we're talking to right now, one of the things that has been like we have to be conscious of is, can you turn off your AI component until we can review it and make sure that it's acceptable? And so we haven't had any issues so far where somebody can't turn that off, which is a good thing. Um, but we have barely dipped our toes in the water in terms of actually deploying AI in any way. Mhm. I expect Copilot will be the first big splash into that space.
Yeah, we've seen.
You're doing it on the external side. I'm assuming the CMO and the marketing team are doing some AI, but when you say you haven't
Mm.
deployed any, it's probably not coming on the internal side. Internally, you're
Correct.
very cautious. Okay. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I can only speak internally. I can't speak to anything they do as far as from a marketing perspective. I'm sure you're right.
Yeah. So from your viewpoint, AI has got to be rolled out internally. It's going to happen.
Hmm.
Are you operating from the point of view that you want to measure twice, cut once, and come up with a policy, and then this is what we're going to do? Or are you looking at it and going, this is dangerous. We're not sure how this can affect. Are you viewing it, looking at it and seeing there's opportunity here, we should take advantage of it? Or are you looking at it right now saying there's risk here right now?
Hmm.
We've got to approach cautiously.
I think it's a bit of both. From our
Okay.
perspective, we are very excited. Like we're not fearful as a comms team. There is a small sandbox, an AI space that has been made available within the company for different teams to basically just to play around with. And we got access to that, and we've been talking. My senior leader is really forward thinking, and so she's very much like, yeah, we need to understand how to use these things to do our jobs. So she's very, very much for it, or at least for understanding it and potentially leveraging it. Um, I think that we tend to just be cautious. For one thing, our IP is is really, we have to be very careful about that. So the biggest
Hmm.
risk for us is somebody takes something about a design or something and they load it into some AI program and now it's available, in the cloud.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the worst case scenario fear. And so our security teams want to just vet all these things very thoroughly. They want to understand exactly where the data goes and everything related to that, which is why we've been slow with Copilot, for example. But we're all for it. Once we have the clearance um, from security perspective, we're going to jump right in. We want to understand that as a comms team from a content creation perspective. And from my perspective, I'm really interested in it in terms of helping usability and helping us improve. I'm sorry, not usability. Well, usability too, but findability. I would really love to see what it can do to help so that when employees are looking for a document, if they're not looking for it by the right name, that the technology will start to figure out
Or in the right
however
place.
it works. Yeah, exactly. But the technology
Yeah.
will be able to say, oh, no, are you looking for this? Because most people, when they're asking about that, are looking for this. And I would hope that the AI could help us do that. So we're all for it.
Yeah, we've seen that pattern of
Mm,
organizations that are they're being methodical in their approach to
mm,
AI, standing up governance committees, testing, trialing, doing POCs, whatnot. And I think that the caution is good. It's good that it's being very much thoughtful in its approach of understanding what our strategy should be and how we should deploy. And on the vendor side, you do see that AI wash happening where we're going to bolt AI onto it, and then hopefully that'll raise our value prop up. But if everyone does that, well, that'll lead to AI friction, and then who knows what ends up
mm.
happening to our information and the friction we're already seeing day in and day out. One of the questions I had for you, Dante, because I saw naturally some LinkedIn posts about this, and I was curious to get into it because it ends up being a conversation we end up having with a lot of folks who happen to be digital workplace leaders, which is the question: who should own the intranet? Is it the business? Is it IT? There's some friction there that happens there. What's your perspective on that? Because I wasn't able to actually attend and see that presentation, but very curious how it went.
Sure. So yeah, my presentation is entitled "Who Owns the Digital Workplace?" No, I'm sorry. IT does not own the digital workplace. Change my mind. Um, and a lot of it is framed in some of the things we've talked about before in terms of who is IT, who is the business, and this analogy I make between Chip and Joanna Gaines. If you've ever seen the show Fixer Upper, um, you know, Chip and Joanna Gaines. Chip Gaines is he's the husband and he fixes all the stuff around the house and he makes sure everything is working. And Joanna is the decorator. She makes sure everything looks beautiful. And I like that analogy because IT is very good at keeping the lights on, doing the major construction, making sure things function, breaking connections when connections are broken, things like that. But choosing your throw pillows is just not typically something that I would want, you know, IT to do, metaphorically speaking, right? Um, and so it's sort of tongue in cheek, and it's like it's really done with love. I have a whole I heart IT, slide that I show because relating to what I was saying earlier, I really do love IT, and so often I find myself I'm on a personal level, I build relationships with these people.
Mm.
They're such good people. They're problem solvers, and so often I can just feel like it's almost like they can't defend themselves. Like they don't know how to defend themselves. I hate phrasing it that way because it shouldn't be a defense. The Chip and Joanna Gaines analogy works because it's also a marriage, it's a partnership. And so part of it is understanding you're not against one another, your partners. Um, but from my perspective, when we talk about ownership, there's a couple different elements, right? And I believe part of the reason that in the examples where IT is owning the digital workplace or feels they should own the digital workplace, I'm of the opinion that it's because, well, we hear the word digital and then we assume that that means it's got to be IT. But the digital workplace, from my view, is not a it's not a technological thing. It's an ecosystem, it's your experience. It's actually a very people-centered thing. And so we go back to what I was saying before about the business loves to blame IT. We also like to believe our own delusions. And so it's like technology is going to be a silver bullet. It's going to solve this problem. It's like, no, it isn't. And we have to understand that the technology is not going to solve every problem. And so I believe it should be the business, when we talk about ownership, the business should be setting the vision for how are we going to use these tools? What does the environment look like? The intranet is a cornerstone to your digital
Hmm.
workplace. Um, Understanding knowing the application, making sure that the application gets all the data that it needs, all the integrations are correct. That's all IT's part. So IT owns that portion of it. But how it should be laid out, where you should go for different information, how some of that information should be presented to you, from my perspective, that should be coming from the business. Now, there's always going to be people on the IT side of the house who have a knack for that type of thing. I would argue that if you really do have a knack for that thing, maybe you should be on the business side and you can speak and work very well with IT. And then I'll at least close this portion with this. The pushback that I get, very often is from well-meaning, well-intended, well-thought-through people on the IT side, and they're passionate and they hear me saying, I want to take their baby away. And I'm saying it's not how I see it. What I see, unfortunately, is when times get lean, IT gets pressed to do exactly what they're tasked with doing, and everything, experience, business analysis, all that stuff becomes less important. It gets deprioritized. And when things are really lean, that's where cuts get made. Because to me, those are the moments where IT is acknowledging themselves. This is not our core function. It's just like, if you do something that's experiential in nature when IT is really pressed, I can almost guarantee you're the one going. And then that's when they look to the business. And if the business needs this function, then they should hire somebody to do it. And to me, that speaks volumes because, when you're pressed, you see what your priorities are, and that's not a knock on IT. That is what IT's priority should be. Like, to me, that's correct. That's appropriate. But the business should be responsible for setting the vision and being able to talk to IT and work with IT to construct the experience that they want. And my feeling is like that's not a skill that has existed in previous generations. It's a relatively new skill. So anyway, I sort of went around a little bit there, Rob. I think I did answer your question and then a little more.
You did. You did. Actually, it's funny as you started describing it towards the end there, I began to think about it's almost like a ship, right? As times are good, the umbrellas are out, so on the chairs and whatnot. But as times get rough, guess what? The engineers got to go down to the boiler room. They got to batten down the hatches. They got to make sure, and all the window dressing and all of that. Well, that's going
Goes
to be
out the window.
left. Yeah, it
Yeah.
goes right off the ship, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the stuff that makes all the difference. When you're an employee, you're trying to get something done. It's that 20%. These solutions give you like 80% of what you need, but that 20% gap is maybe you can get it down to 10. If you're really good, maybe you can get it down to 5. I don't know how good you have. I mean, Disney does some amazing stuff. Like when you're a guest there, like they've done some amazing stuff system-wise. But generally speaking, in most corporate settings, most budgets, if you can get 80% of the way, like you've done a lot. So I've been advocating for this human layer to fill in the difference. And that sort of is the next step in my case around like who should own the digital workplace. It's who do we need in place to actually make a digital workplace that is worth bragging about?
So
And I
it's
don't think
that
those roles
concept
exist.
of digital workplace leaders.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, and what I've seen, and this is kind of what spurred that whole presentation, is that term is being kind of, I won't say appropriated, but sort of taken and applied to things that to me they exist today. It's like I see digital workplace titles on LinkedIn, and then you look at the job description, and it's like this is an application management this is somebody managing the service desk.
Yeah.
This is a clear IT role, and they're just calling it digital workplace. I can't blame them necessarily, but to me, that's not the same thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is that the name itself, digital workplace leader, hasn't matured to the point where it's universally understood as
Hmm.
to its remit, its role, its strategy, its point of view. And, let's say if you're a vendor and you're looking for digital workplace leaders, well, then you have to kind of go in and understand, well, what really do you do? Oh, to your point, you manage a service support desk like that. No, that's not a digital workplace leader. That's not
Hmm.
someone high in the organization looking across the tech stack, the business requirements, the business needs, the strategy. What are also our business objectives, and really being that anchor point and that
Hmm.
connective tissue between the two. And regrettably so for most organizations is they don't necessarily have a true digital workplace leader who is, being able to span both sides between
Exactly.
the business, IT, lead strategy, and have that seat at the table. I'm not sure why it hasn't necessarily caught on because we have been talking about it for years. You see it happen with many organizations where they start to stand up a strategy and a governance plan that assists the business. What advice would you give to organizations that are looking to do such, to do better? And
Mm.
maybe even, second question here, if someone is a digital workplace leader, such as yourself, how to begin to raise their profile or build better bridges between the business and IT?
Mm. Mm. Um, so that's a great question. I think one of the first things I would do if you're in the role, if you've established that role in some way, we could talk about how you do that too, but
Yeah.
that's a whole conversation. But I would start with some form of governance. So start to build a committee of some kind. And I hate to say build a committee, but a small group of people, most of whom will be from IT.
Hmm.
And maybe that's it. It might just be you and people from IT, but getting together on some sort of a regular basis and reviewing from the guy on the lowest level. I hate to say like lowest level of the totem pole, but the guy who's getting the lowest level feedback to be on that call as well. And then he can bring, well, this team, they want to deploy this application. This team asked me if they could have this or that or the other, and just begin having the conversations. Um, if you get the right people or a couple of the right people, you'll realize after one or two meetings, the other right people who need to be in the call.
Mm,
You'll probably get a little bit of head scratching up front of like, what is it we're doing? Like, I don't even understand what we're talking about here.
sure.
And yet you'll fill every meeting because as soon as you start talking as well, this and all of a sudden everybody's kind of like, I sort of know what we're doing here, but I can't describe it. Okay. So that to me is something very concrete that you can do where you start to provide some immediate value and also demonstrate and communicate to your colleagues what it is that you're trying to do, the direction you're trying to take this. Now from that, the challenge may be, well, who makes the decision? I mean, let's say we hear about an application and we might say, we don't think this is a good idea. Like, who says no? Well, you might find that you just, by asking that question, you're again like, you're forcing up these questions that people then have to provide an answer back to you. And the more you can do that and highlight to them like that these are gaps, that's how you slowly start to paint the picture that, hey, this is something that we actually do need to pay some attention to.
Mm,
Um, if you're looking for fame and fortune, it's the wrong path for you because it's not glamorous. It's a lot of explaining, it's a lot of re-explaining, it's a lot of frankly course correcting. I mean, the amount of things that come through that are attempting to duplicate something we're already doing,
yeah.
it's but at the same time, you start to connect dots and people will start to come to you in advance once they get a couple of those, they get a couple of those experiences and then you can build some credibility. So that to me is a very concrete way of starting. If you have the right contacts and you can get at least an initial conversation going, I would start there. Um, the other thing I would say, and I don't know that this is really what you asked, Rob, but for me, this is evolving now, even beyond the digital workplace, to be digital employee experience. And so, you know, I'm just seeing that as sort of being maybe the next iteration of what it is that I do.
Hmm.
And so if digital workplace gets sort of commandeered from a technology perspective, employee experience is not. Now, digital employee experience is sort of something new. So how does that all fit together? That's a whole new set of conversations. But from my perspective, I'm trying to broaden things a bit in that way so that it allows me to involve myself in certain conversations that are beyond just regulating what technology we have in the space. It's also about that experience that people may come across apps and things like that. So I don't think that that's directly answering your question, Rob, but it just felt related to me, so I'm throwing it in.
So from your perspective, Dante, because I like your take. If I let me recap what I think I just heard. There is a digital workplace leader, which is an ambiguous term right now, which could mean all the things we've talked about in terms of comms and intranets, but it could also mean keeping the lights on. And where this really should go is a digital employee experience leader, which is really more about what is the environment I am working in on a day-to-day basis. And that's here, and that's is that a peer relationship in your view? Was that a one back and forth? These rotating, is this Harry met Sally, or is this the War of the Worlds?
That's a great question. I don't know, honestly, I don't know that I've thought it through that far. I mean, I'm not sure that if the digital workplace becomes an IT role where you're talking about application management, okay, if you take it out of what
Okay,
we've
yeah.
been talking about, well, then it becomes more of a peer partnership role. That should be a role in IT, if that's how we're defining it, in my opinion. If it's actually more experiential, then I'm not sure it isn't the same thing. It may to me just be a better name for the same work, in which case you don't necessarily need a digital workplace leader. You might have a intranet manager, and then you might have somebody managing, say, your collaboration tools or something.
And
Perhaps
what's the
they're part of
what's
that
the
team.
metric they're trying to drive up, right? Like, so for the keep the lights on one, it's the lights are on,
Hmm.
everything's running. All my readouts are 5 by 5.
Hmm.
In the world of a digital workplace experience leader,
Hmm.
what's their North Star?
So, in all likelihood, it is going to be something like it. Your regular employee engagement survey. It's going to
Okay.
track employee engagement. And within that survey, you're going to have you're going to have a few questions related to communications. And so I would say that this person should be correlating to communications goals. So, do I know what's going on across the company? Do I feel well informed? There's a correlation there. Whether you can get experiential questions within that survey, so much the better. So you can ask employees like, are you proud to work here? Is it easy to do your job on a day-to-day basis? Okay. Another thing that might be worth doing, and we did this last year, and actually I think we're going to do another one, would be a communication survey. And now you're asking very specific pointed questions. Do you know what tools we have here? Is it easy to work with them? Are you overwhelmed by applications? Like questions that can very directly ask for feedback from employees. But I think that's only part of it. I also
You
think
think
that now, I'm sorry, Frank, I'll just finish this point and then there's also technologies that can allow you to see the real behavior of employees. And that to me is the other side of this that you want to know. So what are you saying? How do you feel? There's that portion. And
Mhm.
that's kind of in place and exists today. What I'm starting to see now is technologies that are able to spit back for you. For example, what percentage of posts in Teams include an at mention? Right.
Hmm.
And you can set a target for that. You can say, okay, we know that the more people at mention, the more likely they are to draw engagement. So maybe we set a target. If it's 10% now, maybe we say we want to figure out ways to educate people on how to use these tools, one of our goals. And then at the end of the year, over the course of the year, we can continue to track. Are we seeing at mentions go up? Are we seeing use of question marks go up in chats? Are
Mhm.
we seeing an increase in chats? Are we seeing a decrease in emails, for example, if that is one of your goals? So metrics that can check real behavior are becoming better and better. And so I think that's actually going to make it easier for us to do our jobs than it's ever been, because it's so hard to quantify the value that we can be adding. But if you can demonstrate more knowledgeable usage of technologies, to me, that's a really valuable metric. And I've seen some texts that do that, some tools that do that now. I'm sorry,
That's
Frank, I
interesting.
cut you
No,
off.
no,
You know?
no, 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 no. I'm glad you went there, because what you're really saying is you're looking for proof that it's actually a great and easy place to work with, and that the tools are there. So where I was going to go was, do you believe that, this experienced leader should ultimately roll up to or be tracking retention? And I am guessing that retention sits there, but honestly, if the tools are easy to work with, it's kind of their job. Like
Mm,
the tools are there, you know how to use them, they're engaging and they're easy. At that point, it becomes a company's larger role to retain,
mm.
or do you view retention as part of that overall mission?
I mean, I think it's part of it. I think it's, but I don't think it's a big part of it.
Yeah,
I mean, being frustrated by your tools at work, sure, that can be frustrating. It might make it just a little easier to leave,
yeah, yeah,
knowing that you won't have to deal with this headache. But
yeah.
I don't think anything has overtaken having a poor manager or just not liking the company
Yeah.
as the reason people
I,
leave.
I
Absolutely.
heard this. I heard this said in Dallas a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Your your digital experience is your manager. Your manager is your digital experience. If your manager is great, your digital experience will be. You know, if your manager is awful, it doesn't matter what your digital experience is.
Right. Right.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So, yeah,
Build
I
better
think that's part of
managers.
it. Yeah. I mean, I would love to see experience as part of, you know, again, this is what makes these relatively soft things so hard to measure, because sentiment and how people feel about a given thing is all you can do is take them at how they say it, and you can track their behaviors, but um, things like retention, things like recruitment, if you have a great place to work. So for example, one of the things a lot of these tools now do is they allow for employee advocacy. So you can take an article from your internal intranet and you can share it to your personal social media network and say, hey, check out how awesome the place I work at. It's some article that talks about, whatever, some program you're doing. That is really cool. Seeing from people and being able to facilitate that from an internal platform. When I saw that capability, I was like, wow, okay. So now there's sort of a retention. It wouldn't be the retention, but what attraction, right? The recruitment component. What can we do to can we see, for example, an increase in our subscriptions in Glassdoor, in subscriptions in LinkedIn, and in our well, I mean, our Instagram presences for our brands are massive. So I'm not
Mhm.
going to expect to move the needle on those, but you can see my point. Um, there's just opportunity there to move the needle in new and creative ways too, which I just think is awesome.
And that's a data point of engagement as well, because if you're an organization that is engaged, I'm more likely to share that content to my social network, as opposed to if I'm a disengaged employee, you can pretty much guarantee that isn't going to happen. They're not going to be going
That's a
out there
great point.
promoting and being a strong advocate and champion for the brand and the product. They're probably spending their time thinking about ways of getting out as opposed to promotion. And that can be a nice measure in accordance to ENPS, that I'm sure there's some correlation between the two.
That's a great point. I hadn't even thought about that. That's a great point. You're absolutely right.
I used
So
to
there you
sell a
go.
social advocacy product a few years back. So yeah,
No, that's great. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, one of those data
Mhm.
points.
Mhm.
Looking ahead, Dante, into the future, right? We talked a bit about AI, but what emerging technologies, trends do you see that should be top of mind for digital workplace leaders? We talked a bit around metrics, we talked a bit around governance, strategy, AI, but what do you think's around the corner, or even potentially some threats to the digital workplace that perhaps we haven't discussed?
Mm. I mean, I think the technologies that are really focused on, like I said before, simplifying administration to enable more self-service from the business owners and less from IT, I think is huge. More and more applications I'm seeing. I love the house analogy for the intranet, right? The intranet is a house,
Hmm.
and more require less and less of the IT teams to come into the house. More and more of it is they connect your electrical, they connect your plumbing, and everything internal to the house. you're able to manage yourself as the administrator. So I think that those are steps in the right direction. Because IT teams are pressed. There's all sorts of reasons that we already talked about why it's hard for them. If you
Yeah.
have to engage IT to make changes to your platform, it just makes every change a big lift. And then the other thing I think is being able to reach employees, regardless of the application that they're looking at. I mean, when we first talked and I saw Workgrid and I saw how Workgrid works, I was like, okay, these guys are on to something. Like, you're just in the browser and it doesn't matter what intranet I have. It doesn't matter what HR system I have. And I know this is going to sound like the portion where you paid me to plug, but it really isn't. Like, this
I
is
swear we
was
didn't.
really, this is really what
But
impressed me
we are
about
going to send you
Workgrid.
some socks at some point soon.
But the fact that you're in my browser. And so now if I have a task from any application out there, I don't need to figure out a way to create a page on my intranet, create a link that sends you there, or like, it's just going to meet me where I am every day. And the more that the technology can do that, the better. I have to assume that someone is out there building what amounts to like a desktop app that functions in that way. And if they're not, that would be an interesting idea, because even opening my browser, at this point is one more thing that I've got to do, as opposed to simply having an interface that's on my desktop at all times. That's like, oh, you still need to do this, this, this. And these tasks are all coming from different applications. And I don't have to fix all those applications in order to bring it all to me in one place.
It's interesting, Dante. You are now dating yourself, because you are that desktop user. Your kids
Maybe.
are your kids are probably. I don't understand why I have to use a device that won't fit in one hand, and someplace in between, they're the people who just open up the computer and just use it to fire up a browser and don't really know what the operating system underneath it does.
Fair enough.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Guilty as
yeah.
charged.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
we appreciate the shout out, and we've got to, we definitely are. Well, we're working on some stuff. We'll leave it at
Good.
that.
That's good.
But you bring up a really good point, which is the ubiquitous nature of what would be a humane technology, right? That's always been our point of view, and I'm not trying to, use this to sell our services or products or whatnot, but it's a humane approach to the employee, right? Where I think most products are focused on, and this is 99% of SaaS vendors, which is, look, the utilization of and the consumption of our particular product, DAO, whatever they're measuring that as, that instantiates their value. How many eyes can I get per day upon our particular product? How much consumption of our servers can we drive, so that we could show that to our customers and say, look how much you're using our product. Yeah, but back to the digital friction story, they're peppered across, hundreds of applications potentially for large organizations. I think that's where technology needs to move. It needs to move in the fact that, people's work isn't going to be focused on one particular application, one particular vendor. It's going to be ubiquitous. It's going to be, spread out. And then how can we at least create technology that is focused on the employee's journey as opposed to what the technology offers? I don't know. Maybe that's too much, dogs and cats living together and peace and harmony and whatnot. But yeah.
No, I mean, I think you're on. I think you're on to it. That's really the thing. And from an enterprise perspective, one of the biggest obstacles to improving your experience is ocean boiling. It's just the underlying work to make so many of these platforms work the way that they're sold is boiling the ocean for many companies. You talk about major data changes, like completely changing like fields, adding fields, changing what we're tracking in certain fields. And those are massive undertakings in an enterprise of, tens of thousands of people. And that is a reason why you go, okay, well, I guess we can't use that feature. Okay, how about the next awesome feature that we said was going to be so amazing and was going to completely change the way people did business? Well, we can't really use that either, or we can use it, but for 2/3 of the people, they're going to have to go to this other website first and approve. And you're just like, oh my gosh, that is the challenge. So anything that allows you to bring, to your point, if you can bring to the employee the stuff that they need to do, and from an administrative perspective, not require us to fix every application before we link to it. Now we're on to something. You know, that to me has been this just challenge over and over again. It's like, oh, why can't we pull in data from this system? It's like, because that system and this system, they're just like totally speaking different languages. Not, and I don't even mean integration wise. I just mean it just the way that you're looking at the data points are totally look different than the way they're looking at the data points, and there's no way to make them talk to one another. That's really, really the big obstacle.
Well, hopefully we start moving in that direction. And who
Yeah.
knows? AI is either going to be the assistant to that, or it's gonna be
Skynet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny because one of the things about AI that I guess concerns me, and it might just speak to my ignorance of how it works, is AI can solve a problem for you much the same way I was describing before, where someone can solve a problem for you with no thought as to the long-term implications or the scalability of that solution.
Mm.
And so you could very quickly, if you say deployed, like, couldn't you potentially have AI designing processes and flows for people all the time that effectively are all doing the same thing, but it's never going to recognize that it's doing the same thing. And how do I build this at an enterprise level? Like, I don't know how it would ever do that.
You'd have something that would be the war of the bots,
Right.
where everybody has built one. Yeah, yeah. AI sprawl. It's interesting. They were even doing kind of some studies on regenerative AI building code, for example, and some of it works, some of it works kind of well. None of it was documented. None of it was properly code reviewed. All of it was
Oh
a
boy.
little, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. But now you make that available to the business, you'll have people just like building mini apps all over the place, and
Yeah.
Again, I don't mean to sound doom and gloom about it. It's just something I don't quite understand. And so I don't know if I don't know how that's going to land when we start making AI available through all these different tools.
It's coming. It's
Yeah.
coming.
Oh, it's coming for sure. For sure. No
We'll be
doubt about that.
deploying the John Connor bot to go back in time and unwind all the code.
Rob, I think you could pretty much you could trademark that, because I can almost guarantee you it's only a matter of time until someone creates the John Connor bot.
We should. I should have the question where I asked you about the future of AI. I should have asked it to you. Like, do you view it as Skynet internally, or is it Jarvis? Maybe that would have been the deep cut. That would have been the way to do it. Sorry, Rob, we're gonna have to cut all of that crap now.
No worries. No worries.
That's all good.
Dante,
Mhm.
really appreciate you coming on the show today. Where can folks learn a bit more about Tapestry, yourself, if you have socials out there, or connect with yourself?
Sure. Yeah. For me, I'm on LinkedIn, so it's just Dante Ragazzo. Just I think I'm one of a kind.
That you are.
And then Tapestry is tapestry.com. You can read all about the company there. Follow us. We do have Tapestry social media presence. So we're on Instagram, we're on Glassdoor, we're on LinkedIn as well. If you could follow us there. And of course, all our brands, Coach, Kate Spade, Stuart Weitzman, give them all a follow as well. Thank you so much, guys. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed our conversation. As you know, like, we could talk about this probably for hours and hours. So I hope people weren't too bored with it, but I appreciate you having me on. Thank you very much.
This was great.
Thanks,
guys.
Thanks.